My name is Claudia. I am an independent consultant. I've been in the network engineering field for longer than I care to remember. And about 2014, I started my own journey through automation. I'd always been a bit of a programmer, not a real developer, but just kind of just quick scripts, that kind of thing. Started out with Perl. But in 2014, I had a project that was one of those situations where you had 6 months to complete a set of rollouts, except we didn't get started until kind of 2 months were left in that 6-month window, and there was no way we were going to be able to be successful with a rollout without automation. Luckily, I was working for a big Cisco bar at the time. We had a DevOps team, and so I basically went to the project management and said, there is no way we're getting this done unless we bring in some automation. And so I would sort of pseudocode kind of the activities that we were trying to automate, and the DevOps team would build it, and eventually, obviously, I got involved. I learned Python, and so those were my beginnings. This talk is very tactical, and I'm actually very pleased to be doing that because you have seen kind of not quite the holy grail yet, but you have certainly seen what's possible out there with automation. And what I spend a lot of time on a day-to-day basis working on is how do I get my fellow network engineers to adopt some of these great tools. I'm happy to hear from many of the presenters that perhaps adoption, maybe we've kind of hit a tipping point with adoption. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not seeing it quite that successful yet. But I'm hoping if we're not there, we're certainly approaching it. And the team here is probably already well underway. You're on the road. You're definitely way down the road in some cases, certainly from the presentations that we've seen today. But maybe you're mentoring a new network engineer, a young network engineer, or you're still trying to get your teammates to kind of come on board. And so just enough network automation to get you started. It may not be you, it may be someone that you're working with. It's sort of my perspective on what I wish I had known, right, back in 2014. So the obstacles are fairly self-evident, right? The first obstacle is time. You're learning a new skill set. That's always a time commitment. Whether you started out, your roots are in software programming and development, or whether you actually went into network engineering because you hated computer science. I have a lot of friends who are in that boat. So time is certainly one. Obviously, time to develop the skills that you need. The tools that you want to use. How do you pick? And this is certainly just a subset. This is my contribution to the smorgasbord of tool slides that you see almost every one of us present to you. So how do you pick from that subset of capabilities and kind of start, just roll up your hand, roll up your sleeves, and get started with automation? And then environments tend to be potentially not a challenge. It depends on where you are, it depends on your company. But you need an environment to work, to develop these tools, to test them out. And I have to say that, yes, contrary, and I'm a big believer in testing. I've skipped right over testing into roll up your sleeves and kind of get started. But please take a lot of the presentations that you've heard here over the last day and a half to heart. Testing is incredibly important. Okay, so I tend to break it down into two paths. You're a programmer, you were a programmer in a previous life, or you have some affinity to programming, and none whatsoever. Again, the network engineer who went into network engineering because he hated computer science and programming and development. And I think you've seen here, we're talking about Python, we're talking about Ansible. So that decision, really, that's kind of the crux of it. if I'm trying to get someone to get started very quickly. Do you have some programming background? Are you comfortable with logic? Because let's face it, we've all learned CLI. It's syntax. At the end of the day, programming is syntax with a little logic thrown in, right? We've all learned it with Cisco CLI. There's no reason why we can't learn it again, but there seems to be, I'm not even sure how to phrase it, right? Just a reticence in some cases to get started with that. But if you are not that, you're so inclined, you understand programming a little bit, then I would definitely get started with Python. There's so many excellent resources out there to get you started with Python. If that's not really your cup of tea, then Ansible, which you're going to have to learn some sort of syntax, right, domain-specific language, but it helps you get started very, very quickly. So that's that's the first decision, kind of what platform, right, what framework am I going to use? And then it gets interesting, because if you notice, everything after that is kind of the same, right? So you're going to need to learn a serialization protocol. What the heck is that? Well, it's a way for what I call sort of a unit of compute to talk to another unit of compute. Whether it's one program you run at a certain time, feeding another program that you run at a second time, whether it's feeding data into your Ansible playbook or your Python script to generate configs. It's kind of the data that is going to be ingested as you work through your process. You've heard them all before, JSON and YAML. I put YAML first if you're going down the Ansible path, because Ansible leverages YAML heavily. Your playbooks are in fact in YAML, right? I put JSON if you're going down the Python path. Really, you're going to need to learn both of them. JSON, I think, probably first if you're going down Python, just because you wind up getting a lot of data returned. You'll wind up wanting to be more comfortable with JSON. But YAML actually works just as well. So, revision control. Nothing to do with programming, really, except you need to have a way to monitor your progress, to look at diffs of your various codes. It's incredibly helpful. Revision control is something that can be hard to wrap your head around. One of the things I do with some clients who really haven't done much with revision control, aren't that familiar with it, I will go through and take one of their configurations and I'll start making changes and just continue to, I'll put it in a repository and I'll show them the progression of their configuration, kind of giving them a heads up, right, on infrastructure as code, but showing them what's possible, and then of course it's just a natural progression to your own code, and making sure that you have it in a repository, you can share it easily, you can keep track of all the changes that you've made to it, which so many things are sort of coming at you at any given day. It's really important to get a good handle on revision control. And by and large, from what I can see, in fact, one of the presenters asked if anyone was using Subversion earlier. Git and GitHub seem to be a good thing to start with. It's free, it's easy. Okay. And the last thing is Linux. If you don't have a lot of background in Linux, it's important to get some familiarity. Invariably, you will wind up having to work on a system. If you go the Ansible route, then your control system will likely be a Linux box. It will actually be a Linux box or a Mac, but you need some familiarity. It will serve you well. A lot of these things, no matter which way you go, will serve you well in the end. Because like I mentioned at the bottom, Ansible is great. If you're not interested in programming, you want to get started very quickly, it's definitely the way to go. There are quite a number of modules that have been built that help you do a lot of the day-to-day tasks that we do. But basic scripting skills, they're going to be invaluable. And eventually they're going to be inevitable. You will need these, even if you're just doing very basic things. So just kind of counsel, your young team members, come to grips with it. they may not be quite so reticent. I don't know. I'm mentoring a 20-year-old right now, and he's just a little sponge, right? He's just sucking all this stuff up. He can't get enough of it. So that's actually pretty rewarding to see. So we've talked about kind of what tools you want to pick, which path you want to go down, kind of the Python path, which if you're not into programming too much might be a little bit scarier, but it really isn't. Python as a language is incredibly rich and will give you just exactly what you need. And there's not a day goes by that I don't find some fabulous new tool, new capability that Python has. It will grow with you, or maybe you will grow with it, I'm not sure which. Right. But it never gives you more than you can handle, is my point. So we're going down either the Ansible path or the Python path. So we've figured that part out, but now we need an environment. We need an environment to run our tools in, and we need a test environment. So from a tools environment perspective, you can run Python anywhere. I have Python on my iPad, right? So that's kind of a no-brainer. If you're going down the Ansible road, then you are going to need to invest in bringing up a control server, which is going to be a Linux-based control server. You can do it on your Mac. I actually will send you a link. I have little pre-built containers. I've heard a lot of people talk about that. You can always bring up your control server on a hosted environment. I did a lot with containers because I was trying to, when I was working for a big Cisco bar, trying to get all the engineers to have like a tools platform on every laptop, if you want to think of it that way, because you wind up having to do the same thing for every client. You get on the network, you want to dump shell commands, you want to sift through them, you want to mine some information. And so my idea was, as opposed to having that issue with, do I have the right module, am I running Python 2.7, am I running Python 3.6, 3.7, get that out of the mix, just load this little container, off you go, and copy down the repository of whatever tools you happen to need. So that can be fairly simple to stand up. And one of the things I'm trying to do here is I spend an awful lot of time. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these little forays into the unknown were very, very interesting, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure all this out. And I would go off on, there was a time when I was doing everything in Vagrant, VirtualBox, and all worthwhile knowledge as far as I'm concerned. But if I want to get started immediately, if my boss come and say, you must start doing this now, you don't really have time to do too much of that. Although I strongly encourage to do a little bit of it. So the test environment can be a little more complicated. If you work in an organization that believes in testing, that actually funds an actual test network for you, a lab for you, you're in great shape, right? You're done. I don't work for an organization like that, right? I work for me. So while I do have a rack with a smattering of network devices, I can't carry that lab with me. I travel a lot, so what do I do if I need to test something very quickly and I don't have access to my lab for whatever reason? So there's quite a lot in terms of options that you can run locally, or you can run in the cloud. Locally, you can run GNS3, fantastic platform. If you've never taken a look at it, it's definitely worthwhile, not just to test your scripts. I've used it to model customers' networks. It's definitely worthwhile, but it is also an investment, right? An investment in learning how to basically stand up your virtual environment in GNS3. Cisco Viral and Cisco Modeling Labs, which is kind of the enterprise version of Viral. I should mention that GNS3 is free. Viral and CML are not. They're Cisco products. Viral, not too bad in terms of layout of funds. I know a lot of people that are running the enterprise version, but it does the same thing, right? It lets you stand up basically your virtual network. Images, right? You can download the virtual EOS, Cumulus, a Cisco 1000. we have quite a number of virtual images that you can just download, spin them up on VirtualBox or whatever your virtualization platform of choice is, and off you go. You can also do the same, very similar things, right, with Vagrant. And now there are actually Docker images that you can just download and spin up in Docker. So there's a lot that you can do locally. In the cloud, I'm a huge fan of DevNet, and DevNet, you may know, has always-on devices. So there's an always-on ACI 8 which is a lot of fun to check out. There's an always-on Cisco X8 router, and there's an always-on OpenNX OS. So those are just out there, reachable on the internet, and always on. So some of the playbooks that I'll leave you with, and the Python scripts I'll leave you with, they leverage that. So if I want to quick and dirty test something real fast, I don't even bother spinning anything up. I'll just go to one of the sandboxes and basically test out what I need to test out. Network to Code has a whole series of labs, multi-vendor labs. You may have seen those. If not, I strongly encourage you to look at them. I use them all the time. I've actually been using them lately to interview people. So basically, take these 5 routers and build me this topology. And that's actually proven to be really, really neat. It lets me know a lot about a candidate, just in terms of responsibility, can they do it? So I've also used those labs to model clients. Just clients thinking about doing something. It's sometimes very easy to kind of show them what they're thinking about doing. Oral failure testing. I remember talking to Jason one time because I needed to do OTV failure testing, and I needed to prove to the client that it was going to work the way the say it was going to work. And I think you actually spun up a different kind of lab for that, so they're very useful. There's also Cisco Viral on Packets, or Hosted Viral, because that's something if you like viral, but you don't want to run around with gobs of memory on your laptop. And DevNet Labs, I can't tell you the number of times I actually sign up for a lab, and I don't do the lab, I just use the infrastructure that they provide to test out whatever I need to do. So we've got so much available to us. There's no reason, not to get started. You don't need a company lab or a lab in your office. So I wanted to compare and contrast those two solutions, the Python solution and the Ansible solution. So this is something I wind up doing all the time. I have to do device discovery and investigation. I got to dump a bunch of show commands, I got to sift through them, and basically pick out whatever, right? Whatever the client's asking me to do. This is very Iowa specific, and at the end we'll talk about where the paths of Python and Ansible, I don't know about diverge or come together, you can be the judge of that. But you'll eventually get to a point where one of the tools that you're using maybe isn't quite what you need. And that's the other reason it's important to kind of take a look at what's in the landscape, because I spend a lot of time meeting with clients who want to start automation, and I try to judge, do I bring Python in and show them a proof of concept, or do I bring Ansible or something else? And vice versa. You've heard this theme today and yesterday, and to take it to heart. It really is, what are they going to consume? There's nothing more demoralizing than you build this great thing, and you put it in your container, you deploy it, nobody uses it. So just not comfortable with it, or they like just hacking away at the CLI. They don't see the values. It's really important. I'll tell you that I'm walking away from Interop with all kinds of ideas, with Slack and the way to present that workflow to some of my clients, so that it's a little bit more easy for them to consume. Okay. So the Ansible path. Well, what do I have to do if I've decided to go down the Ansible path? Okay, well, I need my tools and test environment. Because I've decided to do Ansible, I need a control server. Where am I going to put that? And I will show you, like I said, I do this often enough where I just have a container that's got everything I like. It's got all the modules I like, all the modules I tend to use. It's got a Python 2.7 environment, a Python 3 environment, kind of a utility little container. And I'll just spin it up, do what I need to do. Then, where am I going to test this playbook? Where are my devices? Well, if I'm doing something very, very quick and dirty, I'm just going to hit one of the sandboxes. And this is what there are links at the very end where you can go and grab this stuff and try it out yourself. So, in terms of what activities did I have to undertake to get something working? Well, I set up my control server. I have to set up a directory structure the way Ansible likes it, because I'm going to leverage some of the directories that Ansible uses to go look for information. I had to create a host file, whether it's in the INI format or whether in the YAML format. I still do a lot of my inventory files in INI, to be perfectly honest. And then I had to create the YAML playbook. And in Ansible, I actually have to manipulate the data a little bit to get like a configuration that a normal network engineer would read. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And in the Python path, let's look at the steps I had to undertake. Well, I don't need a Docker container, right? I could just load Ansible. In fact, I've got Python on my Mac. I'm ready to go. Because really, the environment is already there for me if I want to use kind of what's out of the box. And again, I'm going to hit the always-on sandbox device because I'm just trying to test something out, very quick and dirty. So, from an activities perspective, I'm setting up Python because I do need some modules that are going to help me achieve my goals here. So while I have Python, right, already installed potentially on my laptop, do I have all the modules that I need? So there's a little bit of a setup, or a lot depending on how comfortable you are. Then I have to create the Python script. Then there's no getting around it. You have to, you've heard it all, we spend a lot of time talking about source of truth. What am I going to act on? Whether it's by IP or whether it's by hosting, I need a list of things to act on. So I need to basically create a file. This is the approach I took from the Python side of things. I just create a text file with IPs or hostings. Basically an inventory file, for those of you who maybe are familiar with Ansible. Then I have to establish a connection to each device, do what run the show commands I need to run, and then I have to save the output to text. There's not a lot of manipulation in the Python side because I'm actually getting back what you're used to getting back when you run show commands, right? So there's not really anything other than saving the text I got back into a file. So let's take a quick look. Let's see, how visible is that? Jason, can you see that? Okay, thank you. Okay. So I am going to get out. I have a series of containers. You can kind of see my mapping of Ansible versions and Ubuntu versions. It's an Ubuntu container with Ansible and all the other tools that I tend to use kind of baked into it. So this is, I think this is 2.8, might be 2.7. But all I'm doing here is I've got a Docker image. I've already pulled it down, so it'll go pretty quickly. If you've never pulled it down before, it will have some time. It's big. It's not horribly big, I don't think, but it's big. So download it automatically. And then I've got a local volume that I call docker_volume, so that if I do something interesting that I want to keep, the container's actually saving it on my on my hard drive, right? It's basically mapped to my Mac's folder structure. So I can basically kill a container, but that information remains on my hard drive. And it was very quick. So all I need to do now is download the little test repository that I have. So this is the Ansible repository. I'm going to grab the link, clone it. Okay. And this is what I was talking about. I'm not going to get too much into details. I suspect everyone here is pretty comfortable with this, but there's a group vars directory where I keep a lot of the stuff you're going to need regardless of Ansible or Python, right? You need credentials. You need to store them somehow. You can, in fact, store a list of commands. I run different commands on an XOS than I do on iOS, than I do on a wireless controller, what have you. So that's a good place to store sort of these general variables. Then I've got hosts. And I did a host YAML file just so you can start getting an idea of what the YAML-based inventory file looks like. But like I said, I still tend to use the old ini style. There's a logs directory here, and we'll see about that in a minute. So what I'm going to do is run my playbook. So the sandbox is fantastic, right? Because I've done nothing except download a container that had all my pre-built environment and run a playbook, right? I've done nothing else. But the downside to the sandbox is that they can be a little bit slow. And the downside also is that occasionally they won't respond to you. Maybe they're quite busy. I'm sure I'm making it worse. So just keep that in mind. They'll be a little slow, but hey, I had to do nothing, right? They're just out there waiting for me to test my Python scripts and my playbooks. Okay, so you see that we're hitting the iOS XE sandbox, always on sandbox image. And there my playbook ran successfully. So what I mentioned about having to manipulate the data you get back is, if you notice, let's go up here to where it's formatted a little bit better. This is just a big JSON structure that you get back. And so that's actually, if you look at it, if you save that to a file, it looks like that. You show that to a network engineer, and I'm sure their eyes will cross. And they're like, that's not, what are you showing me? Get away from me. So a little bit of manipulation to get that into a human readable format. And you can see, if you run this and you go to the logs directory, I actually saved 2 versions of the files just to compare and contrast. The raw output, which you saw kind of made your eyes cross, and then the human readable output. And for that, just to show you what this playbook looks like. So let's follow through. I'm acting on my Cisco X8 Group. It's basically a group of one. It's the sandbox, the DevNet sandbox. I'm iterating over show commands. I have set it up here so that I've only got one show command, but if you quite literally just add another option, you can put as many show commands as you like. In this particular playbook, it's kind of set up to do that already, even though there's only just the one, and I just did that for brevity's sake. I save the output. I displayed the output because I wanted to show you kind of the morass of stuff you get back. And then here are the 2 things I do. I copy the straight output into a file called inventory hostname, raw output. And then what I do is I have a little Jinja template. Nothing much here at all. that just kind of takes the output and puts it in the format that you're used to seeing, that you would see if you did, show run on the command line. And again, just to show you the examples of what's possible, I actually have another playbook very similar to this one with a ton of show commands that winds up acting on, like 50 or 60 devices. And through Ansible, I actually stick it in its own directory, timestamp it, and zip it all up. Because I tend to wind up having to download show commands off network an awful lot. So those are the kinds of things that are super easy to do with Ansible. Okay. So this is the Ansible playbook. Most of it is just comments about what it's doing. This is the heart of it. And you saw it in action. Did nothing except bring up an Ansible environment and run the playbook. And that's because I'm using the sandbox hosts. So let's take a look at the Python version. Right away you can see, well, this script is crazy long because it's like one of my very first scripts. I'm not a professional developer by any stretch of the imagination. And so, just from a length perspective, right, the playbook's 45 lines, half that really if you take out the comments. And the script is about 500 lines. But that's because, again, I'm trying to develop things that my colleagues will use, that I can hand off to network engineers that are in the middle of a cut, right, that need to do something. So I'm always trying to think about what's the easiest way, what's the quickest way for me to do it, and kind of what might be somewhat easy for them to run. So here, if you look at some of the options that you have to give the script, you basically have to give it a list of IPs or host names to act on, right? Everything else is an option for this script. If you want to put it in a separate directory, you can do that with a -p option. If you want to send different sets of show commands, your own set of show commands, you can put those in a file and give that file name as the option. If you want to use different credentials, so you get the idea. If you just want to do like a ping test, it lets you do that as well. If you want to define the device class specifically, this is using Emitter, you can do that as well. If you go all the way to the top and just take a look at, these are all the modules that this particular script uses. I like to timestamp things, so I'm always putting in the time module. This is all NetMiko under the covers, really. Ogparse, you've heard mentioned here before, is just a very easy way to provide documents to folks. I have a function to kind of parse out manually. I told you this script is very old, just before I actually got the light bulb went off and I started using TextFSM. So you'll see a lot of horrible, regular expression kind of parsing. I need to load text files, right? The IP addresses are in a text file, so there's just a module to load text files. I want to track what didn't respond, what I didn't get show commands off of. So there's basically a function for that. The ping function, I don't even try to instantiate an Emitter connection unless the device actually responds to ping. And depending on what OS you're running this on, you have different parameters for the ping statement. So that's what the OS is. So this is basically modeling what I did in Ansible in 20-odd lines in Python. It's to do with what we did in Ansible is possible with a far, far shorter script. But again, I'm trying to model the environment. I'm trying to show you kind of apples for apples. And I guess the point here is that you do get an awful lot with using the Ansible framework, right? In fact, I was going to show you this against the sandboxes, except my script is not port aware yet, because I have to write that, right? I have to expose that knob. And the sandboxes use different ports, and use port 22. So let me see if I can show you. Okay, so this is the Python script. IP addresses. Go to the lab. So this is just the lab I have at home. But it's basically telling you, okay, here are the IPs you told me you want to act on. This is very wordy and chatty because I wanted to show, right, exactly what was going on kind of every step of the way. So it's going to try, one of the things this does is actually tries different credentials. Because at the time, for the project I was working on, we might have having to, we weren't quite sure what credentials were going to work where. And so at the end, it tells you, you had 2 devices. I got show demands for 2 devices. It'll tell you where the show commands are, where it saved them. It saves them in the log directory, just like the Ansible playbook did. And in this case, there wasn't really any manipulation of what I got back from the Python script. I got back from the Python script exactly what you would expect to get back. Which is good and bad, right? Because then you're back to parsing. Okay. So I think I've talked a fair amount about this already, but if we compare the approaches, we had to set up an environment, whether it's a Linux box, a Linux container, something to run the control server, we had to pay attention to that environment. Whether it's Python and a series of modules that I'm expected to use, again, that step, we want to kind of genericize that step happens no matter what approach you take. We had to set up a directory structure of some kind. We had to create a script of some kind, whether it was a Python script or whether it was the Ansible playbook. The Ansible playbook, probably a little bit easier if you're not comfortable, because all you have to do is read the specifics of the module, and they're very well documented, right? It shows you exactly what the defaults are, what options are mandatory, what options are optional. So you have to just learn the Ansible syntax. We had to figure out what our inventory was, whether it was a text file I called lab IPs, right, or whether it was a hosts file, right, where I basically enumerated the devices I wanted to act on. That step has to happen. We had to set up variables. In Ansible, you saw a bunch of variables that I put in the group vars file. In the Python script, I had a credentials file, I had an IP file. So again, that step has to happen, no matter which way you want to do it. With Ansible, what that framework gives you is, right, is the ability to bring in that data without you having to set up a function called read in text file, right? So I had to do that because in the Python method, it's kind of done for me in the Ansible method. We had to establish connections. I didn't spend a lot of time going through all of the NetMiko code for setting up the connection, but there's quite a lot there, and just take a quick look at it. All of that I had to handle on my own. So here I am trying to capture almost every different type of exception I might be able to get. Could I not establish a connection? What is it? Was it a bad credential? Is it still run in Telnet? Which, I kid you not, this was an issue where at the time for the project I was on. So I had to test for all those things. I mentioned having to test for different credentials. I also had to test to see if the device was capable of SSH, and if not, fall back to Telnet. So all of that is kind of encoded here. But I'm hoping you can start to see the similarity. At the end of the day, we are doing what we do on a day-to-day basis, what we used to do on a day-to-day basis 5 years ago. We're just doing it a bit differently now, and with different tools. So let's look at some of the highlights of the 2 different approaches. With Ansible, I had to understand that domain-specific language, what I keep calling the syntax, right? With Ansible, I actually can encrypt my credentials. If I want to do it, if I want to do that capability in Python, there are plenty of ways to do it, don't get me wrong, but I have to do it. I have to build a function or use a module to achieve that. It kind of comes out of the box with Ansible. I had to build that whole little infrastructure. You saw the function about what I couldn't get access to, what failed somehow. I didn't get show commands for these set of devices. I had to do that in the script. Ansible, if I have time, I'll show you kind of the config file I like to use for Ansible, which just gives me logging out of the box. If I wanted to log, and there's actually logging capability in the Python script, but I had to build that in. Actually, I think I stole a module from somewhere. That whole framework for variables and precedents comes with Ansible. You can actually check, you can put variables probably too many places in Ansible because you have to keep track of what's going to override what. But that whole precedence and hierarchy is built in the Ansible framework. I have to manipulate that however I need to in my Python script. And the only extra step with Ansible was to manipulate the data I got back into a more human readable or traditionally readable format. Didn't have to do that with Python. Now the Python highlights basically going through a series of credentials, right, was a little different. I did not do that in Ansible. Falling back to Telnet, right, a little more tougher to do, easier to do in Python, we'll put it that way. So my point here is that the two paths converge, really. Ultimately, they will converge. And maybe converge is the wrong word. Eventually, you will find that you are comfortable doing some tasks in Python, and some tasks are just far better to be done in Ansible. Someone's already built the module to do just exactly what you wanted to do. You've heard this theme here before, though. Eventually, there will come a point where trying to get Ansible to do the super complicated thing that you need just gives you a headache. Probably you can do it. There's filters, and there's all kinds of tools. And I will say that the gap between just straight up Python and Ansible is narrowing. You've got Network Engine. You've basically got Network CLI, which is sort of an agnostic CLI that you might be able to leverage if you're in a multi-vendor environment. But eventually you're going to try to do something that's just going to be a little bit simpler for you to do in Python. No matter which way you go, you have to identify your inventory, right? No getting around that. No getting around that in our world today, right? You have to manage credentials. So you have things like Tower, you have things like Vault and Ansible. If you're doing straight up Python, it's a little more difficult to do that. Or let me say it this way, you have to do it yourself. You have to log in, you have to establish connections, and you have to execute commands. You saw in the Ansible script all of that. You barely saw any of that, right? That module that I used, the iOS commands module, just has all that baked in. I had to do nothing but give it a few parameters. Noting unreachable devices comes out of the box with Ansible. I had to write my own little routine to basically determine, because at the end of the day, it's no problem, right, if you've got 10 devices. When you're trying to hit 150 devices, you need to have some way to account for what you didn't hit. And you've got to store output. All those things I had to do regardless of which way I went. So that workflow is consistent. It's consistent with what you do today, right? It's pretty much what I do on a daily basis, except I'm doing it faster, I'm doing it more consistently, right? Either way you approach it, those steps don't change. So Ansible lets you abstract things, I think, to a greater degree than Python, and that can be good in some cases and not so good in other cases. The execution gets abstracted to varying degrees, but it lets you scale very well, and like I mentioned, it lets you be very consistent. And the most exciting thing about kind of this revolution that we're in right now is there's always going to be something new. That fish, right? I'm going to leave here. I'm going to see if what I can use that fish for in terms of a project I'm in the midst of right now that I think would be incredibly powerful. So things are growing at such an accelerated rate. You have to kind of dig in and get started, but also keep a view to the horizon. You know, I started out with regular expressions and Perl, right? Then moved into Python. Ooh, Cisco X8. Wow, something that very accurately, basically decomposes a Cisco configuration, not just Cisco, but primarily Cisco, right? With this silly indentation thing. I guess I can't say silly indentation because Python's all about that, so it's young. But text FSM, right? I have this whole library that just goes with me everywhere because it's how I parse all these show commands that I click down all the time. Napalm, if you're in a multi-vendor environment, right? The beauty of not caring whether it's iOS or Junos or EOS, right? I need this information for my devices. And it's the same thing you run across all the devices. Ansible Facts, you heard it here actually yesterday. It's a great way to scale your Ansible playbooks because they're a little less resource intensive. And facts are great, but you can see the progression. And that's just, in the last few years, there's always going to be something new that's going to make your life a little bit easier. So, any questions? If you're interested in taking a look at either the containers or just the little repositories, the Python version or the Ansible version, the links are on the presentation.
Question?
Just real quick, at one point, really early on, I mentioned we're putting together everything we did the second half was kind of targeted at sort of at the beginning of it, we had a lot of school code and DevOps. Would you see having dedicated resources to do that as kind of an important part of it, or how achievable is this stuff? Obviously, the stuff you're doing at the end doesn't matter. It's not about how much do you need to have, or should you be worried about real quote-unquote people that are focused?
That was kind of a confluence of events. We had the DevOps team. I wasn't as comfortable with Python as I wanted to be, and I didn't want to be an impediment, right, to this project. So it was natural for me to go to them. If you asked me that today, I wouldn't go necessarily to a DevOps team. I don't know if that's kind of... I'm not saying they're not going to bring value. What I miss, and you've spent a lot of time talking about it right now, is basically the CI/CD pipeline. That's the next step for me anyway, right? And there I might actually try and leverage some DevOps capabilities. Sadly though, so it was funny, we had a great DevOps team, incredibly talented people. They were then let go. So and that's why I had to learn very quickly, because the people that I used to go to for these things went elsewhere. So, but good question. And maybe I'm doing the DevOps teams a disservice, but it was just my circumstances, right? I didn't have them to go to anymore, so I figured out how not to go to them anymore.
Great, thanks, Claudia.